concern has been, this widespread abandonment we've had in recent years. How good of a crop are we going to have this year?
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. It's so good to have you with us as we talk about the ag industry. And today is no different. I've got a special treat for you. I want to remind you to make sure you like these videos, subscribe to the videos. How do you do that? Well, you just click on that little bell icon down below, and we'll let you know next time we post another episode. And be sure and share these videos too. We sure appreciate the help because you are the ones that are continuing to help us grow into one of the fastest growing ag podcasts out there. It's all thanks to you. So thank you very much. Well, with me today, I have John Devine, the senior economist with Cotton Incorporated, or Cotton Inc., as we like to call it. For about 10 years, I lived in the Raleigh-Durham area in North Carolina, and their world headquarters are in Cary, just on the southwest corner of Raleigh there. John, thanks for joining us. I had the occasion several times to visit your world headquarters, and I would encourage anybody, if they ever get in that area, try and get a tour set up to see that facility. Just right off the top, you might remind everybody what you do there at Cotton Inc. It's not just pushing pencils there, is it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we are the checkoff for cotton. So we're funded, of course, by producers out there and also through importers of cotton products. And our mission statement is to promote the profitability and demand for cotton to, of course, encourage better returns for our growers out there.
Now, you do a lot of interesting research there, trying to help develop new markets and that sort of thing. I was fascinated by that when we took a tour through there. You have lots of computerized equipment and automation to design new types of fabrics and all kinds of things that you can use cotton for. I was very impressed with that. Give us an idea of some of the latest things that you're working on there.
Yeah, so it's a unique facility. And, we're one of the few places probably in the world where you can go from a bale of raw cotton all the way to a finished garment in a single building. So a lot of it's research oriented, as you pointed out, and the goal of that research is to figure out what the latest and greatest is, not only in terms of fashions, but also technologies, with the end goal of, increasing profitability throughout the supply chain, because if you make things more profitable for your manufacturers, that means they can be buying more cotton, and that can help our producers at the other end of the supply chain.
And you work with everything. I was amazed at all the science behind what you do. I mean, you go into improving the fiber itself, you go into the dyes, you go into different types of stitching and how you can construct different types of fabrics and do blends and that sort of thing. It seems like there's no end to the possibilities there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic, cotton. So yeah, you start in the fields. So we have an agricultural research department. We work on things, everything from, cotton breeding through to new seed technologies. We have a fiber competition division that looks at fiber quality. So try and help understand what's happening in terms of what we're pulling from the fields from a quality standpoint, and also how we can improve that to, once again, improve the profitability throughout supply chains, make things a little bit easier to spin, to manufacture downstream, of course, can help our market share relative to some other fibers that we compete against. We've got spinning labs where we've got all three main spinning technologies that exist in the world in there to test out new manufacturing processes. That feeds into fabric manufacturing. They both have knitting and weaving machines at our facility, and dyeing and finishing. And then we go all the way through to marketing too. So we have a trade marketing group, and we also have a consumer marketing group. So if you've seen those cotton commercials, the fabric of our lives, that comes from Cotton Incorporated.
Can companies that work in the textile industry, can they contract with you to maybe have you help them come up with a new type of a product out there?
Sure. Yeah. So we're always working on new technologies, to once again, to increase value. You're always looking for the latest and greatest, the next new thing. So we have a whole field of scientists and engineers that are working towards that. And once they develop these new technologies, we do share it with industry. There can be some constraints. Of course, we want it to be used on cotton goods, but generally, we share that with them once we come up with agreements on, cotton percentages and some other potential parameters that may be there. We can share that to them generally without any costs at all. So the end goal here is just to increase cotton usage relative to other fibers and to make this research available and get it out to the market.
I know I was there with a tour group one time, and this is many years ago, more than I like to admit. But I think one of the things that they were working on at that time was actually digital imaging on fabric. And that was the wildest thing. I mean, just for something to learn on, they were putting family pictures on like pairs of jeans or something like that. It was photorealistic, and it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. I don't know how they did that, but it was it was very impressive. Stretch fabrics and all sorts of stuff. You come up with that right there. Give me an idea when you talk global demand, and of course that's what you're trying to drum up here. Who are the biggest users of cotton, and where do you see the biggest changes in demand here lately?
Sure. So if you take a look at the overall cotton consumption pie, we can sort of identify three major pieces, slices. The biggest one by far is apparel or clothing. So you think about cotton, you think about, everything from shirts to pants to underwear to socks. And, cotton feels good on skin. So that's one of its primary advantages. It breathes. It can deal with moisture. It can do a lot of things. So apparel is the biggest piece of that pie. Following up with that, it feels good on the body. Towels and sheeting. Cotton will keep you cool at night when you're sleeping. Cotton will dry you off when you come out of the shower. So that's the second piece of the pie. And then after that, we have nonwovens. Nonwovens are products you may not think about so much, but there is fiber in there. So I'm talking about like your baby wipes, also some diapers, and some feminine hygiene products out there as well can also contain cotton.
What about country-wise? Who are the biggest utilizers of U.S. cotton? Who do we ship to the most?
Yeah, so we take a look at U.S. Cotton production, compare for where it all goes. One of the bigger pieces of our pie historically, of course, has been our domestic manufacturing, but that's gotten whittled down progressively over the past couple of decades, and we are now increasingly import market. We've got about 85 to 90% of our crop that goes overseas each year. There has been some back and forth, depending on what's going on internationally. But China tends to be one of the bigger buyers. China is certainly our biggest buyer of cotton this year. Vietnam is a major buyer. Turkey also shows up generally in the top five. And then other markets a little bit closer to home also can be pretty important. So Mexico, of course, relies on a lot of U.S. cotton, and some of those Central American countries buy some U.S. fiber, but they also buy a lot of our yarn. So the spinning that we do here in the U.S. is commonly shipped over to Central America.
How big of a role does India play there?
Yeah, so India is the world's largest, home of the world's largest cotton area. Yields in India are pretty low for a variety of reasons. But that big cotton area that they have can allow them to be the world's biggest cotton producer. But it's been back and forth over the past 5, 10 years. It's been sometimes India, sometimes it's China in terms of the world's largest cotton production. But India is easily home to the world's largest cotton area, and their yield potential maybe could put them comfortably in that seat, but they just haven't gotten there yet. And their yields are, as I was saying, some of the lower ones that we see out there in terms of major cotton producers around the world.
Okay, when I moved out to Raleigh, I originated. I used to farm in the Central Plains, so I had a big learning curve when I moved out to Raleigh. I had to learn about things like tobacco and cotton and peanuts and that sort of thing. I was fascinated to learn all the different facets of the cotton industry. You use different types of cotton for different products. You have different measurements on cotton. I had to learn terms like micronair. I'd never heard of micronair before. You might explain just briefly, just kind of a quick keyword glossary for everybody, and then we'll talk about that a little bit and see what parts of the country produce different aspects of it here.
Sure. Yeah. So, cotton's graded on about 10 different quality parameters. Probably the one that gets the most attention is what we call staple. Staple is the fiber length. Your viewers might know that, if they look at their shirt or something, they'll see strings in there. Those strings we call yarns. So it's not the yarns that your grandmother might be using in a sweater. We're talking about yarns that go into all the apparel products that we have. And the fiber length can have a big impact on what kind of yarns you can make. So if you have a longer cotton fiber, it means you can make a finer cotton yarn, which means you can make some some skinnier yarns can go into things like you think your sheets. So sheet counts are influenced by the thickness of the yarn, which is influenced by the staple length. Also, if you have a dress shirt, you'll notice that the yarns in there are pretty skinny. So that requires a finer yarn, which requires a longer staple. And you can compare that against things like jeans, where you can see the yarns a little bit more clearly. That can use a shorter staple or a thicker yarn. So, we like to say that there is a market for every type of cotton fiber that exists, but the type of cotton fiber that you have will determine what kind of yarns you can make. And one of the primary quality parameters we look at is staple length. Of course, the other factors, like you mentioned, micronair. Micronair refers to the thickness of the cotton fiber, which can have an impact on its both strength and ability to make some of those skinnier or higher value yarns, like we talked about. So it is a little bit of a balancing act relative to micronair. And then, of course, there's color grades too, and there's leaf content or field content that can be in the cotton fiber, and all these elements, of course, affect the prices that are paid to the producer according to the quality of the fiber that they produce.
I get the feeling that in the cotton industry, you can almost have vintage years like with grapes. I mean, some years weather-wise might be ideal. You might get some really excellent quality. Other years, maybe you'll have the crop affected by hurricanes or something like that, and you would have degraded quality. Is that right?
Yeah, so growing conditions can affect the qualities. When you take a look at effects of things like hurricanes or exposure to rain, when the bowl is open, that fiber's out there. If you get rain on there, that can particularly affect the color grade. And then you take a look at growing conditions throughout the season, that can affect things like staple and micronair too, depending on when water's there, when it's not.
I also know that there are more than one class. We always talked about upland cotton, and some folks think that you only grow it on hilltops. Well, that's not really the case. But anyway, you have upland cotton. You also have Pima cotton.
Right.
What's the difference there?
Yeah, so there's actually two different species. So globally, there are 4 different species of cotton that are produced commercially. But there's only really 2 that matter. And by far, the dominant one is upland. So as the name implies, it was able to grow upland, and this contrasts with the other species that is commonly known as Pima. We also talked to extra long staple cotton, but in the old days they called it sea island cotton. So it was grown down, in the islands along the coast, and it was a little bit more difficult to produce. So it can produce a fiber with longer staple, but it needs some consistency in the growing season to get there. Upland, you can get more consistent yields with some more variation in the weather. So in terms of the global production pie, upland's about 99% of it. And then about 1% is this other species that we call Pima here in the U.S., but it's also known by other trade names around the world. So Egyptian cotton, when we're talking about that, that's generally the same species that we produce here in the U.S. as Pima.
You may hear it called Pima then, and you would know what they're talking about that way.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's different ways to get there. You can call it extra long staple. To get to that staple length to be considered extra long staple, you need to be this barbadent species that Pima is a sub-variety of that species.
Well, now let's talk about the gorilla in the room here, the market. Let's talk to these producers that are growing cotton this year. There was a lot of speculation last winter that, man, oh man, the market on cotton was just outstanding and we were going to gain all kinds of acres this year. And I'm looking at the chart here, and John, it looks like the first week in April, we were flying high in the mid 80s on the price of new crop cotton, and it's been downhill ever since. What happened this year?
Yeah, well, the storyline really got flipped on its head. So if we rewind the clock a little bit and go back about 12 months ago, we were seeing some price movement start to emerge out in China. So in China, there was some concern about the weather. There's concern about their crop size. China is a market that can be subject to some speculation, and the Chinese government doesn't like speculation. So to tamp down on some of the speculation or upward movement we had in prices within China, last year the Chinese government released some of their government reserves. Their government reserve system, somewhat like our strategic oil system, reserve system. So when prices get high, there can be releases. So the Chinese government released some to tamp down on speculation. So they were selling out of their supplies, and they needed to refill that tank. So what they did is they went to the rest of the world and they started buying aggressively for imports. They bought a lot of cotton from us. They bought a lot of cotton from Brazil. They bought a lot of cotton from Australia. They bought a lot of cotton from anybody that was selling. and they ended up buying a lot more than what they needed to refill what they had sold. And since they were so aggressive out there in the market, there were some concerns that, hey, if the rest of the world comes in there and starts looking to buy some cotton, it might not be available. That was particularly the case for us. We are traditionally the world's largest exporter of cotton. We had a small crop. We had drought in West Texas. China was buying it all up. There wasn't a lot of leftover. This brought us up to that point where we got cotton prices. Our nearby prices made it over $1 for a little bit there in that first quarter of 24. But the market can solve its own problems. So they say, best cure for high prices can be high prices. Those higher prices maybe brought in some more acres. But I think also the market started paying more attention to the demand side. We're in this higher interest rate environment. Let's keep demand pretty sluggish. There's concern about a recession always being around the corner for the past couple of years since the Fed started increasing interest rates. And that's led to slow downstream order demand. So that's still a factor out there. And once China calmed down in terms of its reserve purchases or government-driven purchases, the markets had been more reliant on downstream orders, and they're still not strong due to the higher interest rates. So with that, what we've seen is that, demand side remains weak. We are seeing some more acres come in here in the U.S. We're expected to have a healthy bump in acres. Most other countries around the world are expected to be flat to slightly higher in terms of their acreage in the upcoming season. And when we take a look at the script in terms of the storyline, instead of there being concern about the availability of exportable supply, as we move into the new crop year, we're looking at a record volume of exportable supply. Looking at a bigger crop coming out of the U.S., another record crop coming out of Brazil, strong crop coming out of Australia, also West Africa. And that's setting us up for the situation where we've got competition headed our way in terms of finding buyers for all the exportable cotton out there, and that's been putting this downward pressure on the market.
Do you think that's going to be a bearish trend for an extended time? I mean, are we talking multiple years here, or what do you think?
I think we're working through it. I think similar to some of our other row crops, we're building up stocks. We're looking at a buildup of stocks in our exporting countries, which is going to keep that downward pressure on prices. And until we get those stocks whittled down, I think that downward pressure is going to be on the market. When you take a look at price levels, most estimates are indicating that prices are below cost of production. That's certainly true here in the U.S., but also should be true internationally. So I think something we'll have to watch, and something that could put a floor under the market, will be acreage decisions once we come around to early 25, when growers are looking at the market and trying to figure out what may be the least worst choice available for them.
Now, generally, when I think of the cotton growing belt in the U.S., I guess as a rule of thumb, I would think of the peripheral states starting up around Virginia and the Carolinas, going around the South and all the way over to California. Give me an idea how the growing season has been this year. It must have been pretty good, because we've dealt with drought in the Southern Plains for about 4 years, and it just decimated the cotton crop, especially in Texas, northern Texas. I believe that's probably the biggest producing area, is it not?
Yep, you're correct. So we've got 17 states that grow cotton, running from Virginia over to California. The biggest concentration of acres we have is located out in West Texas. In West Texas, there's not a tremendous amount of irrigation, so a lot of dryland acres, and that's a dry area. That can be tumbleweed country out there. So cotton is drought tolerant. That's why it can get by with less moisture, and that's why it's one of the few crops that are available to our producers out there in that region. But with it comes some susceptibility to drought and very dry conditions. And as you pointed out, we've been through several years of drought, and it looks like we're coming out of it this year. And instead of having a lot of abandonment out there, we're looking at having some decent production, and that's going to lead to that bigger crop. That's lining up with bigger crops from some other countries too. It's going to have to compete in that export market.
Give us an idea of when the cotton harvest will begin, and when you get into the core of harvest here in the U.S.
We've got different regions, and Texas is a big state, so a lot of different regions out there, even in Texas. But the first area that will start to harvest will be down along the Rio Grande, in the Rio Grande Valley. And they should be getting ready to gear up to collect the first bale in the next few weeks if they haven't gotten there already. So that's coming. But it's just a trickle at the beginning, and then once we get to, around October, that's when we've got more of the meat of the in terms of the harvest starting to come in. So, that would continue, potentially through November and even December or January, depending on what the weather conditions allow us in a given year.
I had heard that some areas kind of got away from cotton here over the last few years, and some gins had closed. But I believe I heard this year there may be a few new ones popping up out there. So what's going on with that? Any changes? Are we growing in gins? Are we reducing the number? What's the truth here?
So it's a little bit of both, So longer term, there are fewer gins. There have been some shifting, out of cotton. You take a look at the Mid-South region. We have seen increasing soybeans and some increasing corn production there over the past I would say 2 decades. With that, there has been some loss of gin capacity. There also has been some consolidation of gins too, with existing or remaining gins getting a little bit larger over time. But there also has been some investment too. So there's been some exciting new gins that have been opening their doors over the past couple of years, including some big ones out there. So it's good to see new technology coming in. It's good to see new investment coming in.
Have you heard any problems with the crop here as of right now? I mean, here we are. We're getting into August, and I just wondered if you have any pest problems, disease problems, something like that.
The big issue for us is West Texas because we have so many acres out there and the weather can be so volatile. So, the concern has been, this widespread abandonment we've had in recent years. How good of a crop are we going to have this year? Last year, things got out to an okay start, and then they got really hot and dry as they moved into this late July, early August time period. That's when the cotton plant sets blooms. That's what needs a little bit more water. And last year just got dried up. But this year we were watching it. We started out with some good moisture out there. Things had been hot and dry. We did get some rain here the past couple of weeks that helped bring crop conditions back up, and it's bringing some optimism back there to the region. But, in terms of the variables that we watch, of course, West Texas, number one, with their moisture situation. Something we'll continue to watch as we get deeper in the season is what may happen in terms of tropical weather. NOAA and forecasters out there are saying this could be a big year in terms of hurricane activity, and that's something we're going to watch, particularly once we start to see bowls begin to open in the next month or two.
Absolutely. Well, John, it's great to talk with you again. Thank you for the update on the crop and on the industry as a whole. You're a great spokesman, so thank you for that. John Devine, Chief Economist with Cotton Incorporated. And that'll do it for this episode. We thank you for joining us. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock channel. Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.